Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Municipalities of Saskatchewan webinar, Open Forum on Council Operations. I want to thank you all for attending. It's great to have you here today. My name is Sean Wiskar. I'm one of Municipalities of Saskatchewan's advocacy advisors. I'd like to thank our webinar sponsor, Sumisure. Thanks to Sumissure's sponsorship, all of Municipalities of Saskatchewan's webinars are now free for all of our members. So be sure to keep an eye out on municipal update, member emails, and our social media channels for future webinar opportunities. You can also help shape those webinar opportunities by staying to the end of today's presentation and filling out our survey. Your feedback makes our webinars even better. A link to today's presentation will be sent out to all registrants in the next few days, as well as a PDF of today's PowerPoint. Well, actually, today's an open forum webinar, so there won't be a PowerPoint. I would like to give you a tour of the presentation page. As you all know, Municipalities of Saskatchewan uses Zoom. You can see all the icons at the bottom of your screen. You have your audio settings at the bottom left of your screen, and if you're having any problems with the audio on your computer, you can always switch to phone audio. We have the Q&A for questions. Please note that you have your choice to send your question anonymously, and if you see a question you really like in the Q&A box, be sure to click the thumbs up icon to ensure it gets asked first. We also have the chat for comments and conversation. You can send your comments to just the panelists, or if you click the button above the text box, you can send to all panelists and attendees. And I see many of you are already doing so, letting us know where you're from. So if you haven't, let us know where you're from in the chat box now. We also have the raise hand function, which will be used by us if we're having any technical difficulties or need any last minute feedback. With that, I would like to introduce today's panelists. Brian Matheson has served the community of Lumsden for 15 years, 10 years as mayor and 5 years as a councillor. In addition to the experience with his own community, he worked 16 years as an educational sport administrator for the Saskatchewan High School Athletics Association, and this experience helps him appreciate both sides of the council and administration dialogue. Brian also has 4 years experience with the Saskatchewan Municipal Peer Mentor Program, and Brian also was recently featured in Maclean's article discussing his time as the interim mayor of Craig. We also have Monica Murkowski. Monica began her career in her hometown of Wilkie, Saskatchewan, where she worked for 15 years. She left the municipal field for a few years, but was lured back when her family relocated to Rocanville, where she was employed as the CAO for 11 years. After leaving Rocanville, she advanced her career further as the CAO of Kerrobert and is presently the CAO for the town of Lumsden and the RM of Lumsden. The town and RM of Lumsden function as a joint office where she has been located as the CAO since 2017. Finally, we have Bukola Afolabi. She is the in-house legal counselor for Municipalities of Saskatchewan. Bukola joined Municipalities of Saskatchewan in July of 2020. Bukola's journey with the municipalities hasn't been quite long, but it sure has been meaningful. Bukola's practice focuses on municipal law, corporate law, advisory and legal services, and prior to joining MuniSask, Bukola was practicing law in the private sector for almost 4 years. So I'll get all of our panelists to turn their cameras back on if they could. Perfect, and we're just waiting for Brian. There we go. So we're going to kick off our questions, but as a reminder, if you have any questions on council governance for either our in-house council Bukola or our mayor Brian or CAO Monica, feel free to leave them in the Q&A box located at the bottom of your screen. My first question is for Brian and Monica. What is the biggest mistake you see new councillors make when they come into their new role? And we'll start with Monica. And Monica, you're on mute, so you have to unmute yourself.
We're off to a brilliant start. What I was saying was good morning, everybody, and thanks for joining us. I hope you'll find this useful. So one of the biggest mistakes I think it's common is that you'll have someone running for councillor who has one desire, and they were a one issue candidate, and then they either get their way and they finish their term or not, or sometimes they don't get their way and finish their term or not. So I believe that people should come on council, with dreams and aspirations for their community, but also understanding that there's a process, and if change is not always quick and you need to be patient. Ryan?
I would suggest that counselors need to make sure that they ask questions. Try and learn before you try and teach would be a very good example for new counselors. It's important, as Monica suggested, that you're not coming there for a one issue, because that seldom works. I think you need to learn the process, learn all you can about what it means to be a municipal counselor and all the rules. Don't be afraid to ask questions, but don't sit there wondering what I should have said. I should have asked this question during the meeting. When you get home at night, ask the question, as everybody says there's no such thing as a stupid question.
Perfect. Thank you, Brian, and thank you, Monica. And I think that's an excellent first point, that certainly you need to come on council and be prepared to learn, because it is quite the new endeavor for yourself. Bukola, our next question is for you. What are some key pieces of legislation and the legal requirements that come with it that you suggest councilors familiarize themselves with? And Bukola, you're also on mute.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Sean, for that question. One of the major ones to think of, the very first one would be the Municipalities Act. And then you want to familiarize yourself with the Cities Act as well as for the people from the North, you want to look at the Northern Municipalities Act as well. So those three things, those three acts will be the biggest ones. Of course, LaFoIP is another one to keep in mind, considering this role, this type of work that we do. LaFoIP is an act that you want to keep in mind, as well as the Tax Enforcement Act is another one too. So the first three will be the big ones that a councillor should familiarize themselves with, and the legal responsibilities that is key on those first three ones I mentioned will be you just knowing what your duties are, your roles are. Everything is clearly stated in those three major acts, as well as determining situations of conflicts, which is a big one for councillors. You can find those can find all you need when it comes to your roles, your responsibilities, as well as being able to determine situations of conflicts in those three major acts.
Thank you, Bukola, and I think that's certainly a great place to get started. And one thing I will flag here as an advocacy advisor, we did send out a elected officials handbook to all communities and their new kind of elected responsibilities. So if you haven't seen that already, there is a list of legislation in there that we have recommended that you familiarize yourself with. I apologize, I can't say that word today, but Bukola has certainly made some excellent points for you to get started. Our next question is for Brian. Brian, before the 2020 election, you were appointed as interim mayor of Craig. What was it like forming a relationship with the new CAO? And what do you think are some of the foundational elements important in forming new relationships with your administration?
Good question. I think the thing that I try and emphasize with my new CAO or with any CAO is my trust or belief or faith in them. I'm a partner with them. I'm going to work with them. Mostly it's saying, I say to them very plainly that you're the knowledge here. I'm a counselor, a mayor, but I don't know all of the information that you know, that you've gone to school or you've learned, and I'm relying on you to steer us in the correct in the proper direction and not have us make any major blunders in decisions that we make. I try and very hard to emphasize how important I think the administrator is. And I truly believe that. I think that's one of the major problems in our communities is that counselors don't respect their administrators enough. You don't have to be their best friend, but you have to understand that their job is to make sure that the community that we all live in moves forward. That's their job, and they don't have personal interests as a rule. They do it because that's the right thing to do.
Thank you, Brian, and I think that's some excellent points. Monica, we'll just jump to the other side of that. So obviously you're the CAO for both an urban and a rural council. How do these relationships differ, and what is it like working with two different councils?
Well, you know, I don't know that it differs a lot other than their specific roles. You know, the town is going to provide a lot of recreation services and a utility service. And the RM is going to be primarily looking at, you know, providing good roads. Now, this RM and municipality are different in that their proximity to Regina makes them very active, engaged communities. And so the RM finds itself heavily involved in development and encouraging not only residential acreage development, but we have an organized hamlet, and we really endeavor to expand commercially because we're on the number 11 highway. And the town is now, I mean, it's about to go into an annexation process because it's a growing, bustling community, and we're out of land. And so now the town and the RM that I work for each are going to have to cooperate in an annexation. So the actual mechanics of the two councils is that they have what's called a joint administration committee. So everyone who works here in the office is technically employed by the town, but the RM pays town for almost half of our wages, something to that effect. So there are 3 members from the RM council and 3 members from the town council, and they get together periodically and they discuss things like say wages. It's December now, we're going to strike wages for next year pretty soon. They also jointly own the fire department. So they get together and they look at capital budgets for the fire department. And they have a good working relationship because we've joined and we function under one roof as a joint venture. You know, that enables us to, we have a planner on staff, we have a junior planner, we have a director of finance. And because we've joined forces, we now have the resources to expand our staff to have a large number of management people who can handle all the intricate details of the development that's going on around here. I don't know if that answered your question. I'll just be quiet now.
No, absolutely. I think that's a phenomenal answer, and it shows kind of some of the best ways that you could work towards a goal of regional collaboration and mutual success with your surrounding RMs and communities. So I think that'll be really excellent, and hopefully that gives some of our people on the call today a kind of a good idea of some of the things that they can work towards. So I will note we have over 100 attendees on the webinar today, so don't be shy. This is your opportunity to ask our qualified experts anything and everything about council governance. We have a couple questions coming in. I only have 2 left, so once I am done my questions, we're going to jump into your questions. My next question will start with Bacola, and it's for the 3 of you. How is conflict of interest defined in the municipal context? That's the question for Bacola. And then for Brian and Monica, how do you handle conflicts of interest in your community as a mayor, as an administrator, and then also for Bacola to think of as legal counsel giving advice?
Okay, so I'm going to start with the definition. I'll just keep it very simple. Whenever you think of conflict of interest, it's I would define it as simply as saying that when your public responsibility or duty is kind of in conflict with your private interest. So that would be my simple definition. So if you have a public role, either as a councillor in this regard, in this case, in this specific situation, or as a mayor, or as any elected official, and that role, that your public duty is in conflict with any private interest you have. That would be my simple definition of conflict of interest.
Perfect. And then just the follow up to that, Bacola. So how do you handle addressing conflicts of interest as when you give legal advice as a legal counsel to communities?
My take to that would be, think of the 4 Ds. So usually I would say it's easy when you have that kind of thing to remind you. In any situation where you're even thinking it, the first thing you do is you declare it, you disclose it, you discuss it, and you document it. So those will be my recommendation to anybody that feels or believes that I have a scenario, I have a situation, I'm worried. And, even as simple as if you're thinking about it, just stay away from it. And how you can handle that, when I say declare, that's, for example, if you are in a meeting, a council meeting, and there's a topic on the agenda that you feel that you have a conflict of interest regarding, then you quickly talk about it. That's declaring it, and let them know. And then once you identify that and you declare that you have a conflict, you disclose it to the members by which you have said, and then you discuss it by letting them know what you want to do. You have the option of leaving that meeting. That would be my recommendation. You shouldn't be partake of such a topic once you have declared conflict in that. And also making known that such should be documented once you get back in the minutes. So that would be my suggestion on how to deal with a situation or a scenario of conflict.
Perfect. Thank you, Bacola. Next, we'll go to Brian. Brian, how do you handle conflicts around the council chambers?
Well, we're very upfront about it. We make sure it's on every agenda. We make sure everybody's very aware of it. I'm not sure that I quite agree in terms of you can sit around, you can declare your conflict and leave or not leave. Not on my council. If you declare conflict, you leave. I think that's what I've learned, and I think that's what I would recommend to everybody, is if you have a conflict, and it's not just a financial, a fiduciary conflict. Sometimes you might have a conflict in personality, where if something comes up in your council decision from Joe in town, who I absolutely will not ever vote for anything for him. I'm just not going to vote in favor of anything he wants. Then that's a conflict, and you need to declare that and remove yourself from discussion and from everything about the situation. We make sure it's noted in the minutes. You leave, we discuss, the motion's made, and then you come back. So I think it's important that you discuss it and leave. You declare it and leave. Sorry, not discuss it, declare it and leave.
Perfect. Thank you, Brian. And Monica, what is the administration role in handling conflicts of interest, and how does it impact you when you're sitting around as a CAO at the council chambers providing resource?
Well, I guess the role of the administrator is not necessarily to point out that a member of council has a conflict of interest, but to properly record it, document it in the minutes for people who do declare, and to protect them from any kind of an accusation in the future. Brian is right. The town of Lumsden takes conflict of interest very seriously. It's on the agenda every meeting. People can declare at the very beginning of the meeting if they know that there's a topic coming up that involves them or their family, and it's uncomfortable to have a conversation in front of them. And if I put my RM hat on, some of you may have heard about one of the neighboring RMs being back in the news again over conflict of interest. And our reeve is very clear at every meeting that if you have a conflict of interest, you better declare it, because he doesn't want to end up on the news. And so sometimes you'll have a topic on the agenda that will drift off or evolve into a conversation about something else that wasn't on the agenda necessarily. And then all of a sudden somebody's got a conflict. And what I do notice is that our councils, both of them, they're all of like mind, that they don't want to end up in the news or being accused of something and ruin their reputation. So they'll thrive out of conflict. So I'm going to leave. And so I'm very fortunate that I don't have to deal with sitting at a table looking over at Councillor Joe thinking, wow, I know your son's going to be a contract. You should not be in here. I'm fortunate because these people are, they're professionals, and they don't want to stake their reputation on or lose their reputation on something like that. So I'm lucky.
Perfect. And Monica, unfortunately, we just had you cut out a little bit. So if I could, I'll just get you to switch over to phone audio. That way we can make sure we hear you clearly. So to do that, it's just next to the microphone icon. There's a little arrow. You click up and hit switch to phone audio, and you should be able to do that. So while we're waiting for Monica to do that, we will jump into our next question. And this is going into the Q&A pod. So our next question is for Brian. Brian, how do you stop previous council members from getting involved with council business when they still have a connection to the council?
I'm not sure what this would mean. I've never had that happened. I certainly keep in touch with previous councillor members myself. I sometimes will ask them what they think, but I've never had a council member that's interfered with this. And certainly if I did, I would be very blunt. Your time has passed. You can make a statement like any regular private citizen, but that's what you are right now as a citizen. You're not a council member, so if you have something to say it, but you carry no more weight than anyone else. So I've not had that problem, but I wouldn't put up with it very long.
Perfect. Thank you. And Nicole, I don't know if you have anything to add on kind of the legal context of where are the powers of an acting councillor, and then where do those powers disappear when you leave your role as a councillor?
I would think that legally, once a person's term is over, apart from just providing, advice if asked, I don't really think that their role should continue as long as they've left and their term is over.
Perfect. Well, thank you both for that. And it looks like Monica's still getting set up, so we'll move on to the next question. How do you get village documents into the administrator's hand when the previous mayor stored the village documents? And I guess we'll go to Brian next, unless Monica has anything to add.
Come on. So this person will not turn them over? Is this what I'm understanding then? The former mayor will not turn over documents?
And so if this was your question, feel free to raise your hand, and we can certainly have you provide kind of more context for this.
It sounds
it-
like only copy of those documents is with the mayor?
Here we go. So Roxanne has raised her hand, Katie. So if we could get you to give her speaking privileges, maybe she can kind of allude to this. And then Roxanne, if you just unmute yourself. Yep. Can you hear us now?
Yep.
Perfect. Go ahead.
Yeah, so my question is we've had a previous mayor who a lot of the documents that should have went through our village email was going to a personal email account, and all those documents were stored at the mayor's place. And now we're trying to get them into the hands of the administrators so that we don't have these documents out in a taxpayer's hands. We have a member on council as well that gets some of those documents and hands them over at our meetings, like geotech reports, building permits, reports from BPI. Some of them are policies and stuff that were made in some kind of a meeting. I can't find motions or anything on it, but there's boxes of documents that are the village, and they wouldn't be normal documents that is public information. And our administrator doesn't have them. So somebody's reaching out, and I know I made a motion. I tried to make a motion at our last meeting, but one of the council members was not very receptive of it. So it kind of caused a stir in the meeting, and our mayor is pretty new, and he wasn't sure what to go do or go on. So we just finished the meeting and called it the end. So I just know we have another meeting coming up, and I'm just like, okay, is the motion the right way to do it? Do we just send a letter asking? I've gone through the Municipality Act because I'm very new to all of this stuff. So I've been reading to find out how we can do some of this stuff so that it doesn't cause a big uproar at our meetings. So I'm looking for help.
Has that mayor been asked to hand those documents back to the municipality?
Well, I had mentioned it in the meeting to the council member that is on there. And I did receive an email directly from the previous mayor asking everything that she has that we want back. And really, it's just anything that has been given to her as a mayor. I don't know any executives or any council things I've been on. When you are done, you're done, and you turn everything back. You can turn back keys, you turn back the documents, anything that isn't public information. And I just find it weird that our our administrator doesn't have copies of all of this, inspections of our transfer station, our water security stuff. Like, our administrator should have all of that and doesn't have that. They're in these hands of previous council member, which I don't feel is right. So I did ask the one member on council, and then I did phone the advisory board, and they said to make a motion, which caused a whole stir. So I just want to know what to do for my next meeting.
Well, fortunately, some of those documents are you can get those simply by asking your EPO for copies of them. But you know, if someone has building permits and drawings, geotech reports, it's pretty valuable information for the municipality and, you know, future property owners to have. So I don't think it would be unreasonable for the administrator to simply begin by sending a letter to that person formally asking for those documents, just for, you know, historical records. And you don't want to have to do another geotech report in a year and pay somebody to do it because someone has, I don't want to say holding hostage documents, but I think a nicely worded letter would be a good place to start. And I don't think that that should have to come as a motion to council. That's just logic.
Okay, that's what, when I filled the advisory board, they had said like make a motion and that'll make an action for the administrator. So that's what I tried to act on last month.
Yeah,
Perfect.
I think, if I
Sorry,
may,
go ahead, Brian. Yeah.
I think it's really important simply to make a phone call to this guy or to knock on his door or girl, or, it's really important just to say, can we get this information? Rather than making it a letter, and people read letters and they read into something that wasn't intended. I think a phone call or a visit would simply be the best thing to start with. If the person is holding out, then you have to go through motions and letters and whatnot. But I can't imagine why they would want to keep this information from the town. If they were originally on council or a mayor, they should have some affinity for the community.
Perfect.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, so Roxanne, if you have follow-up questions, just because we don't want to get too deep into any one issue today, just because we have a limited amount of time, you can certainly follow up with us and we'll connect you with the panelists. Our next question, what do you do if someone consistently does not declare their conflicts? And maybe we'll start with Bacola.
Legally, according to the Municipalities Act, the person is the one that has the responsibility to declare it. But practically, what I know that obtains in most municipalities is people kind of help people make this declaration. For example, some municipalities would have it on their agenda to kind of just let people know that that they have that duty to declare when it comes to any situation, just something to prompt them. So, it might be good practice to have, I think Brian mentioned that earlier, that in Lumsden, they take that seriously and they would just have it on their agenda each time so that people know you're aware that it's something you need to do. So of course, if there's something on the agenda that you need to declare, it's your responsibility to do so. But this is not in the act, but if somebody, like in this situation, continuously does not declare, it might be something that the CEO, just out of courtesy, CEO or the administrators, the mayor might just want to have a chat with the person informally to kind of let them, to be sure that it's not a honest mistake or something out of inadvertence, just to be sure that it's maybe, to check to know if they are really aware. But I would say that legally, a person that has conflict is the one that needs to declare it.
Perfect. Thank you, Bacola. Brian or Monica, do you have anything to add around maybe a situation you've run into in the past where someone consistently didn't declare their conflicts and how you handled the situation?
I guess fortunately, we've not been put in that situation, or not in a serious matter anyway. I would definitely be talking to the counselor and telling them that they need to withdraw from discussion. If they persisted, if they would not withdraw, I'd use my Twitter notation that this comment is not factual or is a conflict of interest in my comments to the council. And I would certainly tell the counselor that I would declare them out of order if they persisted in that area.
Thank you, Brian. Monica?
There may also be an opportunity to include a clause in your council procedures bylaw where another councillor can make a statement asking if another councillor has a conflict of interest, so that they can get it recorded in the minutes. If that person is going to refuse to leave, then at least it's noted in the minutes that there was somewhat of a discussion. I'm not, I've never had to do it, of course, because I've always been on councils that I know how to behave themselves, but I would hope that someone would first have a conversation with that fella or girl and let them know that what a conflict is, that others think that they have one, and what the possible ramifications of that are, which, you know, include, you know, filing papers in a court and embarrassment, and, you know, you're risking your reputation, and they need to be more aware of their responsibility. People look at them as being leaders in their community, and they want them to follow the rules, and you don't want to have the public thinking they need to drain the swamp.
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you for that, Monica. And I think it goes back to that point you made earlier of, do you want to end up in the news, and what would the headlines say about you? So certainly. Our next question, I am a member of a local not-for-profit group. I receive no remuneration for this, but I also sit on council. Do I have to declare a conflict and leave the room when discussing decisions that are being made on this not-for-profit? And I guess we'll go to Brian first.
I would say no. I don't think that you are gaining at all in a financial situation in something like this. So I would say no, especially in smaller communities. You're going to have people that are wearing multiple hats, and you just have to ask yourself, are you gaining? And I think your answer would be no. If the answer is yes, then you should declare, but I would say no.
Perfect. Bacola?
And to add to that, I would just say that, like this situation, I agree with Brian that there's no conflict in this regard, but just so that the person is aware of other situations like that, that you don't have to declare conflicts, I would say to look at the Act, Section 143, 2A to, I think is L, you know, would tell you situations of financial interest where you don't have conflicts. So in this instance, the person doesn't have to leave. There's no conflict here.
Perfect. Thank you. And Monica, do you have anything to add?
I guess my only thought would be if your nonprofit happens to be the local dance club on which your daughter's a ballerina, and you're asking the town council to give you a contribution to your dance club, if you don't get that contribution, if your fees are going to go up, then maybe you have a conflict. And perhaps if you think you might have a conflict, why would you put yourself in that position and risk it? Just leave.
Perfect. Excellent advice from the three of you. Our next question, we'll start with Monica. How do you deal with disrespectful counselors at council meetings?
You know, in my entire career, I probably have only encountered that once. And because I've only encountered it once, again, I consider myself very fortunate that I've always been in the company of people who are professionals and take the role seriously as community leaders. So I guess if it was a continual show of disrespect, it should be obvious to the others around the table. And you probably want to, if you have the courage, to speak to that member privately and ask them if there's some sort of a problem that you could work out and talk it out and see what happens. That's a difficult conversation, but the CAO's role is filled with difficult conversations. So I would start by talking to that person. If this is a regular occurrence, bring it to their attention that it's a problem. And then of course, if that doesn't work, then you go, I would assume the next logical step is to speak to the mayor or to maybe your personnel committee.
Perfect. Thank you, Monica. And Brian, I don't know if you want to jump in here with any personal experience you have around disrespectful counselors and situations and how you mitigated that issues.
Yeah, I mean, you have to be cut it off right at the start. If something happens, you have to step in right away at a council meeting and say, well, this type of conduct is not acceptable. Then I think it's very important that as a mayor, you go outside and talk to the individual personally and say, I had this feeling that there was some conflict here or there was some disrespect here. I don't think that's acceptable. Do you have a problem? You know, let's talk about the situation and work with the counselor in a situation that's not embarrassing, but you have to be forceful. You can't allow it to fester. If you do, nothing good becomes of it.
Perfect. Thank you, Brian. Our next question is for Bacola. Bacola, is there a Coles Note version of some of the legal resources available to new counselors? In other words, is there an easier way to find and understand some of the legislation, such as resources that help explain the Municipalities Act, LA FOIP, and some other things that you could recommend?
Yes, so there are a few resources that can help you. For example, if you go to the Government of Saskatchewan website, which is saskatchewan.ca, there's a council, there's a handbook for elected officials. And that kind of just breaks it down in a layman's term. I know that reading legislation or acts can be quite challenging, but yes, go to the Government of Saskatchewan website. There's a handbook that breaks it down. So there's one. We're going to be we have the workshop for newly elected officials too, where you can find such resources. So those are the two that comes to mind now. If I think of any other one, if you leave your email address, we can send you more. But those two websites will help with making it easier.
Perfect. And some of the other things I'll flag. So in the early part of 2021, you can certainly look out for webinars. We're going to be doing lots of them on governance. So you can certainly look for those. We have previous webinars on understanding LA FOIP and some of the other new legislative changes. So you can certainly go back in our catalog and watch those, as well as something that I'll be flagging more at the end of today's presentation, the MLDP program and the MLRR, the Municipal Leaders Roles and Responsibilities Workshop, which is coming up December 8th. So make sure you keep an eye out for that. The registration is very affordable this year because it's virtual at $45. And it'll be covering a lot of this material. Our next question is, I've been involved in so many community groups, business groups, councils, activities, and feel strongly that for many of these groups, does that serve as a conflict, or is it just a passionate understanding of these activities around the council table? And it looks like Brian has shut his camera off, but if we could just get it to turn it back on, perfect. Yeah, Brian, do you think a passionate understanding and kind of want for these groups constitutes as a conflict of interest?
No, I don't necessarily think so. I think that if you've been involved for a long time, you have to realize that everybody's got an interest somewhere, and the council interest is no different than your interest in the arena or the Lions Club or whatever you're involved in. You have to realize that your decision as a councillor is for the residents of the town, and you might wish that they could do something, the town could do something for this group or that group, but you have to realize that you need to treat everybody the same. And I think if you're really involved in a true community manner, that will be apparent to you, and there's not going to be a conflict.
Perfect. Thank you, Bacola or Monica. Do you have anything to add?
No, I agree with everything Brian said.
Yeah, same here.
Perfect.
That's why we get along.
Great group of panelists. They're all best friends. Our next question, I'm a volunteer firefighter that receives a fixed dollar amount per call out. is that a conflict? Is it a conflict if council's discussing something that's geared towards the fire hall? And I guess we could start with Monica.
I guess my only thought would be that if it comes to annually or however frequently you determine what that fixed dollar amount per call is, that is a conversation that you wouldn't want to be involved in. But if you're talking buying a new fire truck, I think that you probably have some valuable input that the group could learn from. So I would say no, only when they're talking about what your pay is going to be that you would declare.
Perfect. Thank you, Monica. Brian?
I agree.
Perfect. And Bukola, do you have anything else to add?
Nothing else to add. She's spot on that one.
Perfect. Our next question for you, Bukola. Do private interests always have to do with financial benefit, or are there other types of private interests that could constitute a conflict?
It doesn't always have to be, it doesn't always have to be financial interest, but I'm trying to think of other situations. Like, I know that Brian alluded to a situation where even if it's a case of personality, where you feel that you don't get along with somebody and you feel that you won't be able to vote as you should, you might want to declare conflict in that situation. But according to the act, I mean, that's Brian talking from a practical point of view, being a counselor for a while, but I'll let him add to that. But then I feel that there are other situations of private interest that you can see if you look at the municipalities as, which is section 143(2)A to L, kind of just gives you other situations of private interest, which is not necessarily financial.
Perfect. Brian, do you have anything to add?
No, I think that's exactly correct. It's not always financial, but if you dig down and dig down and dig down, usually it comes to money. You know, you might think it's not financial today, but the outcome a year later might benefit you.
Perfect. Thank you. I see we have a couple questions here in the chat, so I'm just going to take a minute to read those. This next one, it looks like it's for Monica. When hiring office staff, who should be involved in the interview and hiring process? The Municipalities Act has changed to give administrators the sole power in staffing matters, but should council still be involved to any extent?
Well, I suppose it depends on the size of your organization as well. If you're a smaller organization, the administrator may not want the sole responsibility of determining who's going to be, say, her assistant or a receptionist. But I can only then tell you how it occurs in this office. And that, so if we're hiring what we call an office service clerk, so myself and the assistant administrator would go through the resumes and we would jointly interview for office service clerks because they report to her, and that's how we deal with that type of position. But when we get into positions where you're up into a managerial type of role, say right now we're looking for a director of planning. So that will be a situation where you're interviewing. I think you'd want, in my case, the Reeve and the mayor to be present during the interviews, and they have in the past. Same thing for the director of finance position, because it's good to get input from the leaders of the two municipalities towards this person, and doesn't leave all the responsibility on you to think of all the questions you need to ask, or to sometimes you just get a vibe for somebody that leads to a question that's interesting. So I guess I give long answers. I guess, as far as who's involved in the interviewing, it depends on what the role is and whether the administrator is comfortable being the only person who might be interviewing somebody if you're a smaller community.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Monica. Bacola or Brian, do you have anything to add?
I think that the reason that we're in the situation that we're in is that there's a really good communication between Monica, the administrator, and myself as mayor, or our Reeve. And Monica is given a lot of authority because she's very open and doesn't try and hide anything. If she's making a decision, she usually makes a comment, here's why. And it's strictly an open relationship, an honest relationship. And with that brings a lot of trust.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Brian. And so we have about 10 minutes left in our presentation today. So we don't have time for a whole lot more questions, but for those of you that do have some remaining, we can certainly pass those on to allow for our panelists to address them. Our next question, do you need to have a policy manual with your procedure bylaw? Bacola, can you provide some insight on this?
Well, I can say that not necessarily that it is stipulated that you have to have a policy manual, but it's usually helpful to have one because it serves as a guide, so if you don't have one, I wouldn't say that it's like it's something you have to have, but if you have one, it helps you. It provides for a very good guide when it comes to the procedure bylaw. That'll be my answer to that one.
Perfect. Thank you, Bacola. And so my final question for Brian and Monica today. Brian and Monica, how can council and administration work together to be successful? And what are some examples of ways councils can impede the success of administration in the community? And I guess we'll start with Brian.
Well, I think, how do we work to be successful? I think we have to be very open, very forward thinking, forward planning. That's a real big thing for us. We adopt a best practice principle in our community, and we're certainly always trying to look at what's in the future for us. We try and plan financially so that if an opportunity comes, we're ready to act on it. Maybe that's a really good thing for people to think about, is making sure that you have funds set aside for the future so that when a grant program comes and it offers you 33-cent dollars or 27-cent dollars, you've got the finances to make that happen. We're doing a big solar project right now that, even though we've spent a huge amount of money on a wastewater treatment plant, we had money set aside for a solar project too, and we were able to take advantage of the opportunity that was before us because we were financially prepared. So be ready for those things, but be financially solid, and then you can do them ahead of time.
Perfect. And Monica, what are some of those keys to success between the council administration dynamic, and what are some ways that or pitfalls, I guess, for councillors to avoid to ensure that they're not running into issues with their administration?
Well, to be successful, I think that everyone needs to be on the same page and have a clear understanding of what the goal is, and that comes with communication. Communication plays a role in every success. And so if we have a meeting, and we'll just give an example. So we'll have a meeting and we're saying, okay, we are going to approach the RM and we are going to make application to annex this land and this land and this road. And then everybody gets on the same page. You don't all have to be in agreement, but once the decision is made, that's how you go forward. And you don't work against each other and start second guessing. You stick together as a team and you get it done. And then just as Brian was saying, financially, if you want to be successful, this is going to hurt a little bit at the beginning, but you may have to raise taxes so that you can set aside funds to put in reserves so that you have the funds available when it comes time for you to pay your 50% of a grant, because you don't turn down grants, right? So I know that's there's a lot of elected people out there gulping right now, but you may have to raise taxes so that you can have a savings account.
Perfect. Thank you, Monica, and thank you, Brian. And last but not least, we'll go to Bacola. Bacola, this is your first foray into municipalities of Saskatchewan educational content, and it's certainly not going to be your last. I just wonder if you could give our new counselors some advice on accessing legal counsel and some of the things they want to be aware of in terms of what municipalities of Saskatchewan offers for their communities.
Yeah, so the very first one I would say that you should go to would be our website. When it comes to any, and that's why we're here, we're just a phone call away. You can easily get my number, and usually that's what we do. We try our best to help our members in any way we can in terms of advocacy as well as legally. So if I'm going to speak to that, I would say that the first thing is look to our website. There's always something that you can learn from. And like Sean said earlier on, the couple workshops and so many training programs we have planned for next year even. And yes, and then if you don't find it on the website, or you don't find the answer you're looking for, even from some of the training workshops that we've mentioned, you can always call us, because if we don't know, we are always very keen on making sure we find the right answer for you.
Absolutely. I think that's the key point, that if we can't get you an answer immediately, we certainly are going to work to make sure we can get you an answer eventually. So that brings us to the end of today's presentation. I just want to take a moment to give a huge thank you to all of our panelists, Bacola, Brian, and Monica. I think the insight that you provided today was really helpful, and I think it's going to set up our new counselors for success. If you want to continue to build on this workshop, on today's webinar, I really encourage you to attend our MLDP, Municipal Leaders Roles and Responsibility workshop, which is coming up on December 8th. During this half-day workshop, you're going to see a presentation from Brian and Monica, a presentation from Bacola, a presentation from the Advisory Services branch from Government Relations, as well as the Ombudsman. So there's certainly lots to learn in this half-day workshop. And as I mentioned, the cost is $45, so it's very affordable to attend, and you can do it virtually from home, even in your pajamas. Again, I'd like to thank our panelists for their excellent presentation. And as a reminder, we're going to be sending out a recording of this webinar, as well as the contact information if you have follow-up questions for Brian, Monica, or Bacola. If you could all just take a few minutes to fill out this short survey so we can improve our upcoming webinars, that would be great. And make sure you watch out for them in Urban Update. We have one webinar left for this year. It's coming up on December 15th, and the topic is cybersecurity. So we hope that you've enjoyed all the webinars we've been able to offer so far this year. And if you keep an eye out in the calendar, you may see a couple other invitations for events into the end of the year. Other than that, I would just like to thank you all for attending today, and hope to see you at regional meetings December 1st and 2nd, and the MLRR workshop coming up on December 8th.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
To everyone.